Hi, I'm Joel Bloom, president of New Jersey Institute of Technology. At NJIT, we believe that not only our students, but all citizens need to be informed about the issues facing higher education. As New Jersey's Science and Technology University, NJIT is proud to support the important programming produced by the Caucus Educational Corporation and their partners in public television.
Funding for this edition of Caucus, New Jersey has been provided by Wells Fargo, New Jersey Manufacturers Insurance Group, Auto Insurance, Homeowners Insurance, and Banking under the principle of stewardship. The law firm of Gibbons PC, Johnson & Johnson, Fedway Associates, Inc. And by New Jersey Natural Gas, proud to support education in our communities. Promotional support provided by NJ Biz, all business, all New Jersey, the Star Ledger, and NJ.com, everything Jersey. And by New Jersey Monthly, the magazine of the Garden State, available at newsstands.
Everything you ever wanted and needed to know about bariatric surgery, surgery that is required for people who have tried everything to lose weight and now they need to lose weight medically. I want to introduce the gentleman who's about to help us understand that topic. He is Dr. Alex Abkin, Medical Director, JFK for Life, Lifestyle and Surgical Weight Loss Program at JFK Medical Center. Good to see you, Doctor.
Pleasure being here.
Now, there's a lot of talk about this and some confusion. Someone watching right now could say, hey, wait a minute, I think I'm a candidate, right? Who is a candidate? Who isn't a candidate for bariatric surgery? We're going to go through some of these. We're going to show some pictures of the procedure, or different procedures. But who right now is simply someone who should just diet and exercise and is not a candidate?
Well, we have to go by official criteria as established by National Institute of Health. And those criteria have been in place since 1991. So to be a candidate for surgical intervention, you have to meet the criteria by what we call body mass index.
BMI, body mass index.
Which takes into account height and weight of the patients. So roughly, if your body mass index is 35 and above, and you have medical conditions such as diabetes, sleep apnea, hypertension, degenerative joint disease, arthritis, you are a candidate for surgical intervention, provided that you can prove that you tried non-surgical weight loss, which is diet and exercise.
Okay. Obesity itself, a disease?
It is officially been accepted as a chronic disease by American Medical Association, but it's been officially declared as a disease by National Institute of Health and Medicare Services since 1991.
But even if you don't have the diabetes or the other diseases that sometimes are often connected to obesity, the obesity in and of itself is a disease.
Correct, because if your body mass index is over 40, which roughly correlates to about 100 pounds over the ideal weight, the studies have shown no matter what diet and exercise regimen you engage, the success rate beyond 6 months is less than 5%.
Okay, let's do this. Let's go, if we could, Bob Morris, our terrific, longtime Emmy Award-winning director. Bob, if you could, and our team in the control room, put up the video, not video, there's a picture of 3 different, I believe, procedures. If you could, put them up, Bob, and the doctor will talk them through. Doctor, if we can talk them through, we can put them on the big screen, it'd be great. These are the current most used bariatric techniques. If you can talk them through, Doctor.
Yes. The currently most commonly used procedures are adjustable gastric banding, which is a purely restrictive, least invasive procedure where we put the gastric band around the top of the stomach, and through the port we can tighten or loosen the band.
Hold on. Why is that the least restrictive?
Because we don't cut the stomach, we don't reroute the intestine to the stomach. It's outpatient procedure, very fast recovery. But for the same token, since we're purely restricting how much solid food patients can eat at any given time, there is a chance that the percentage of the weight loss will be less compared to other procedures.
Is that what Governor Christie had?
I believe so.
Got it.
The second procedure is a stapling procedure called a sleeve gastrectomy. It's a very popular procedure and has very good results. We do permanently remove 3/4 of the stomach during that.
I'm sorry for interrupting. 3/4
of the stomach.
Why 3/4?
It's been established this is usually the most effective amount to facilitate durable long-term weight loss. And the third procedure, laparoscopic gastric bypass, has been in existence for over 30 years. Very good procedure, been past the test of time, is considered to be gold standard. but it has more malabsorptive side effects, and some people think it's too much.
What are those side effects?
Vitamin deficiencies, iron deficiency for younger females, and all the procedures do require long-term follow-up. This cannot be underemphasized, that surgery alone is a great step towards the healthier lifestyle, but without good, proper follow-up, I think all surgeries long-term may fail.
See, this whole JFK for Life initiative, and I've talked to Ray Fredericks, the CEO there, about that a lot. A lot of it goes beyond these medical surgical procedures. A lot of it is about fitness. A lot of it is about nutrition. Talk about that.
I think it's very important that most people who come to see me as a surgeon truly tried it all. And what really we have to understand, if it's a chronic disease, how do we treat other chronic conditions? How do we treat patients with high blood pressure or diabetes or kidney failure? You have to come a regular follow-up visit, check your labs, check the medications, change the medications. And if you look at the obesity as a chronic disease, then the success long-term of maintenance of that disease, if not eradication of the disease, is really hinged upon good follow-up. So you have to start with an assessment of the patients. What's their nutritional status? A lot of time I think people think, well, if somebody is obese, they cannot be malnourished, but in fact they can be protein malnourished. So you need to have a dietitian evaluate them before the surgery and engage them in changing of habits before the surgery.
But doctor, our connection to food, our psychological and emotional connection to food, I often think about that. I mean, I don't want to get into our family and its connection to food and some of the unhealthy parts of that. I mean, there's some healthy parts of it because it would bring us together, but the amounts were a different story. And the outcomes always weren't so great in terms of the impact on a lot of folks in our family. But here's my question. To what degree does your program, your initiative, deal with the behavioral aspects?
It's right there from the very beginning.
How do you deal with it?
You have a behavioral licensed counselors on staff who establish what each individual has different or common in how they interact with food. And therefore, they assess each individual needs and start making suggestions on how to change the interactions with food.
Change our interaction with food.
Correct.
So
I think we deal with food for the good, for the bad. It's just because we deal with food. I think the important thing to recognize is surgery does not take away the food. Surgery just makes you satisfied with food and not feel overindulged in food as a must happen.
So someone gets this least restrictive procedure, which is again called
gastric banding.
They could in fact, could they quote eat through it?
Yes and no. They cannot eat savory foods through it because you'll get sick. You'll get sick. But when the people say eat through it, we're surrounded by high-calorie beverages, foods which do not induce the feeling of satiety, yet satisfy your cravings, because we deal with food for different reasons, not necessarily because we're hungry. It's what we call head hunger in medical community.
Head hunger.
Correct.
Translate?
You're emotional, you're depressed, you're anxious,
We're
you're
not
frustrated.
really hungry.
We're not hungry, but with food is ubiquitous, and we reach for it for any reasons.
And part of the initiative is to deal with that and find other ways.
Correct. To transition them and educate. I think the key is really the word is education, because if you educate about what is the problem, why you interact in the wrong way, and you add to that a tool for weight loss, whether it's a band, a bypass, or a sleeve, at that point, it doesn't matter. Choice of the procedure is hinged on medical conditions the patients have, but ultimately that's how you transition patients to healthy interaction with food, and then you add exercise program to that, and you continue with aftercare afterwards, and that makes for a successful overall comprehensive program.
More tools. Dr. Alex Abkin, JFK for Life, I want to thank you for joining us.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Stay with us. We'll be right back right after this.
If you would like more information on this program, or if you'd like to express an opinion, email us at info@caucusnj.org. Visit us online at caucusnj.org, or find us on Facebook at facebook.com/Steve Adubato, PhD.
Dr. Stephen Pemberton, professor and historian of biomedicine at the New Jersey Institute of Technology, otherwise known as NJIT. Good to see you, doctor.
Pleasure to be here.
Let's define some terms. Biomedicine is?
Biomedicine is the convergence of medicine with the life sciences. Effectively, over the last 60 years, science has really transformed the nature of medical practice.
Bioethics?
Bioethics is really a field of experts who have been drawn into medicine to address the kind of novel questions that have risen from new medical technologies, new innovation.
Some of these questions are fascinating. Name some of them. As technology advances, as people are kept alive longer, some of those questions now include, Stephen?
Well, you know, the emergence of just life support technology has been tremendous in raising questions for families, physicians as well, about essentially, you know, what is our quality of life going to be at the end of our lives? You know, everybody faces mortality, every family does. And
back up for a second. As we do this program, we're taping this program later part of July 2013. Nelson Mandela in South Africa is alive.
Yes, yes.
Okay?
Yes.
His family is facing certain issues, as millions of families face, correct?
Correct, yes.
Is this what we're talking about?
Essentially, you know, this is a unique situation in the sense of who he is.
But he's a well-known figure, but
yes.
Karen Ann Quinlan in the 1970s in New Jersey was a Supreme Court case decided by the New Jersey Supreme Court with Richard J. Hughes as the head of the Supreme Court at the time. Similar case, not a well-known person, but millions of others in between, right?
Yeah, yeah. You know, the idea that life can be extended. We don't know exactly what Nelson Mandela's situation is because the information is tightly controlled there.
But technology's involved and medicine's involved.
Yes, very much so. And I think the main issue that people need to understand about medicine, and physicians are well versed in this, is that this is a very uncertain enterprise. Physicians are adept at trying to anticipate different outcomes, but one of the high costs of technology in the kind of social sense is that it gives us greater control, but it also delivers a certain amount of uncertainty. There's a great deal of unintended consequences when you start bringing new modalities for intervening.
For example?
Well, in my own field of research, I look at diseases like hemophilia.
Genetic testing is what?
Genetic testing, but even something like a simple treatment. So in hemophilia care, blood transfusion technologies have transformed the lives of hemophilia patients into something that approaches normal in terms of controlling their bleeding disorders. But those same treatments, say at the end of the 1970s, beginning of the 1980s, produced a situation where they were at extreme risk for blood-borne pathogens. So about 90% of severe hemophiliacs in the United States contracted HIV through their treatments. That was an unintended consequence and an uncertain affair that in retrospect one might be able, and the courts tried to demonstrate this, one might be able to sort of say, well, retrospectively, the government, the physicians, the companies should have known that this would have happened. And there were many court cases through the 80s and 90s that attempted to demonstrate that. But the reality is there were a lot of uncertainties. And, you know, the Center for Disease Control, the NIH, all
National
of these,
Institute of Health.
all of these federal agencies were always playing catch up in terms of, and the Food and Drug Administration as well.
Interesting, you say the government often plays catch up to medicine and technology.
Yeah.
So for families,
I
mean, a lot of this is government public policy and complex stuff, regulatory, complex stuff. But for people watching right now, you've said having a living will is important.
Yes, sure.
What is a living will?
Well, it's you know, it's essentially a legal agreement that sort of sets out what your expectations for your doctors and your care would be in a kind of tragic circumstance.
Okay,
maybe a terminal illness.
Could I say in my living will, look, if something tragic happens and the only way I'm being kept alive is with medical technology, that it's a machine.
Sure.
And the quality of life, and I'm explaining this to my wife and, and my lawyer and others around me who I trust. And I'm cognizant at my age right now. And I say, look, that's not the way I want to live. No, I'm serious.
Right.
It's not the way I want to live.
Yeah.
Can I do that?
Absolutely, you can do that. There are a number of different mechanisms. Most famously, the sort of DNR order, do not resuscitate.
Do not resuscitate.
Yeah. And what those types of administrative mechanisms do is allow you to experience something closer to a natural death, in the event that, there's minimal brain activity, in the event that you anticipate substantial pain on the part of you or your loved one. And a lot of people don't want to live in that
And also
kind of
there's a
agony.
healthcare, I'm sorry for interrupting, the healthcare proxy. That means that you designating someone else?
Yeah, you're designating a family member, a friend, maybe even a legal person to sort of make decisions in the absence of your capacity to do so, whether you're, unconscious or whether you're in too much pain to, make a decision.
Why is this, in light of your research, in light of these advancements, why are you saying that is so important for people watching right now to have that discussion? You're not saying what people should do. You're saying, in terms of what decisions they should make, but you are saying you need to have that discussion because?
Well, essentially, I mean, it's part of a larger problem we have in our culture. So on the individual level, it's important to have discussions in your family about your wishes with regard to the health choices and what kind of life you do want to live. And that gets increasingly important as you get to middle age and your golden years. But these are incredibly difficult decisions, conversations to have. And in part because so many people will invest in the hope that medicine offers something that in many cases medicine can't deliver, even at its cutting edge.
A lot of uncertainty.
Very much so. So what you want to do is and the doctors will press this, hope for the best, anticipate the worst. And that is effectively the best strategy. The other issue is the larger issue.
2 seconds, go ahead.
Yeah, the larger issue about what kind of information we're getting about these things from our broader culture. The media is inundating us with information about new breakthroughs, new cures.
I want that new thing. I want that, which presents a whole new set of issues.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's also a level of information that most people aren't equipped to understand what it is that's being offered.
More information isn't always the answer. Dr. We'll have you back to talk about the media's role in all this another time. Dr. Stephen Pemberton at NJIT, I want to thank you for joining us. Complex questions, but they must be asked and discussed with family. Thank you very much.
Absolutely.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Stay tuned. We'll be right back after this.
If you would like more information on this program, or if you'd like to express an opinion, email us at info@caucusnj.org. Visit us online at caucusnj.org, or find us on Facebook at facebook.com/Steve Adubato, PhD.
Peter Bell is Executive Vice President, Programs and Services at Autism Speaks. Good to see you, Peter.
Great. Thank you for having me, Steve.
Tell everyone what Autism Speaks is, particularly because the website's going to be up throughout the segment.
Sure. Autism Speaks is the leading advocacy and science organization for autism. We were founded in 2005 by Bob and Suzanne Wright, and we are really an organization that is committed to research, awareness, family services, and advocacy. We're trying to make the world a better place for those that are living with autism.
Autism is?
Autism is a neurodevelopmental disorder that usually happens in the first 3 years of life. It is an impairment of social interaction, communication, and repetitive and restrictive behaviors. Really what it comes down to is it challenges an individual to be able to relate to the world and to be able to communicate and to really have a life that is full of independence.
How prevalent?
1 in 88 is the current figure. There are new studies that have shown that it's about 1 in 50 in some cases. There was a study done in South Korea that actually showed 1 in 38.
1 in 38.
1 in 38. Happens 4 times more often in boys, so the numbers and prevalence in boys is even lower.
Because? Do we know?
We don't really know. There's obviously perhaps something that is involved with the hormones, perhaps in the genes themselves, but we really, at the end of the day, we don't know what the difference is.
You know, public awareness and understanding of autism, it's not where we need to be.
No, it's not.
But are we significantly better informed today than we were, let's say, 5 years ago?
Without a doubt.
Make the case.
Well, certainly, I think everyone these days knows a family that's probably affected. And sometimes it's someone within their own immediate family. So we've done a lot in the last really 5 to 10 years to create an awareness. And I think it's important that we understand what autism is and what it isn't. And it's also important that we recognize that those who have autism really can become very important and contributing members of our society. It's a spectrum disorder. There are those that are very challenged, and there are others.
Spectrum meaning range.
There's a very broad range. And so there are some people with autism who actually have terrific skills and could be great workers and could be really important contributing members of our society. Obviously, they all are, but we also know that there are some that are quite challenged and will need supports throughout their entire life.
You know, we saw each other recently at an event. My sister, Michelle, has been an advocate and a champion.
Phenomenal one, yeah.
In this area for a long time, you know? And I was honored to be a part of that event, hosting it. But one of the things that struck me about this event and the other advocates like yourself who were there was that the issue of aging up kept coming up.
That's right.
That I believe at 21, things happen for people who are dealing with autism, suffering from, if you will, autism, that certain services that have been afforded to them end.
That's right.
Talk about that.
So there's an educational benefit that's actually a federal mandate. And so every child up until the age of 21 in most states is eligible for those benefits to receive a free and appropriate education from their public schools. What happens, though, when you turn 21, and as I said, in most states, is that you end up having to then go into the social services that are available within your state. And oftentimes there are long waiting lists. So unfortunately what happens is that as kids age out of that educational entitlement, they end up having to really figure out what they can do and what they can get from the federal government as well as the state government in terms of their benefits. And unfortunately, there's just not enough to go around.
What is there for them?
What is there?
What's there for them? They happen 21.
Right.
What's out there for them?
Well, there are a number of service providers and very good ones, and there aren't, unfortunately, enough. And the funding, as I said, ultimately goes away. And so the families end up having to cobble something together if they can, and that really makes for a very challenging life. When we talk about what an adult life is, just like you and me, it's about having a job, it's having a home, and having friends, and being able to be involved in the community and have a meaningful life. And those are very challenging things for a person that has a disability like autism. And so it really is one of the things that our community is very focused on. As you know, the rate of autism really skyrocketed really in the last 10 to 15 years. And so those kids that were born in the 1990s are now becoming teens and ultimately adults. We have some people call it a tsunami of people that are entering into the adult system, and we're not, as a society, really ready for that to happen.
And talk about New Jersey. Talk about what's going on in New Jersey and compare it to the rest of the nation with respect to how we are dealing with autism.
So New Jersey is actually quite well known for having a very robust autism community. You can go back 20 years, and some of the really early seminal work that was done in the autism community happened here in New Jersey. We have some of the best private schools for students that have autism. We have wonderful legislators, both in the state as well as in the federal government, who've really been champions for autism. Senator Menendez just actually this week introduced a new
Senator
bill.
Bob Menendez. Put that in context, because I know he's very involved in this issue.
He is. So one of the, actually two of the most important pieces of legislation that have created funding for research in autism, the Combating Autism Act and the reauthorization, were championed by Senator Menendez. But also just this week on Monday, he introduced a new bill called the Age-In Bill, which will create transition services, research, navigators, other opportunities and resources available to help guide people into that process of how you become an adult living with autism. So we're very pleased with that. We have Congressman Smith from down in the central part of New Jersey, who's also been the co-chair of the Autism Caucus. Chris Smith, exactly. He's been a champion. In fact, he was one of the first people to go to the CDC and demand that they start counting the number of people who have autism, not only here in New Jersey, but around the entire country.
So there's bipartisan support because Chris Smith's a Republican, Senator Menendez is a Democrat.
That's exactly right.
Not a partisan issue.
Autism is not a partisan issue. It happens to everyone. And we certainly have champions both in the federal as well as the state government who've really stepped up and done some wonderful things. But the most important thing is that we really do need a national plan. We don't know why there's been this increase. We don't have all the resources that are necessary in order to create a better life for those that are living with autism. We need to understand what's behind this increase, and we also need to do a better job of supporting those that have autism.
The preceding program has been a production of the Caucus Educational Corporation, celebrating 25 years of broadcast excellence, N13 for WNET, NJTV, and WHYY. Funding for this edition of Caucus New Jersey has been provided by Wells Fargo, New Jersey Manufacturers Insurance Group, the law firm of Gibbons PC, Johnson & Johnson, Fedway Associates, Inc., and by New Jersey Natural Gas. Transportation provided by Airbrook Limousine, serving the metropolitan New York, New Jersey area. Caucus New Jersey has been produced in partnership with TriStar Studios.
New Jersey Manufacturers Insurance Company offers policies that can protect against auto accidents, fires, windstorms, floods, and many other serious and urgent situations. Tips on what to do before, during, and after you're confronted with the unexpected are on the emergency preparedness section of njm.com. New Jersey Manufacturers, helping the Garden State prepare for the unexpected for nearly a century.